All right. Who of you is already more or less familiar with Vonk? Yeah, okay. Enough of you are not, so I will do the introduction. Well, this is not working very well, but this is. This is a Let's Build session. It's a double session, so this one and the next. This one I will use primarily for explanation what Vonk plugins are, what Vonk is and what a plugin is and how you can build it. And then on the next session you get to build your own. Well, I do IT for quite some time. I'm the lead dev of the Vonk Fire server. That's why I'm here. For the do-it-yourself, you can do some preparation, and here is a link that will get you to a gist that lists all the links to downloads or whatever. It also already has the exercise. Yeah, there you go. So it will take you here, and this is everything you might need to download. It says Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. You can program with Visual Studio Code as well. I find Visual Studio a little easier to debug. So this is the developer session. But I'll first start what Vonk actually is. It's a Fire server. So it's an implementation of a Fire RESTful API. Fire RESTful API defines search, read, etc. And our Fire server can act as a clinical data repository or as a platform to program your apps against using the Fire interface. It can run on Mongo, SQL Server, and SQLite, and you can put your own backends to it. It has a plugin framework, that's why we're here, and it's cross-platform because it runs on the modern .NET Core platform. It's also a reference implementation in .NET versus the one in Java, and you can deploy it where and how you wish, Dockerized, Kubernetes, binaries, whatever you like. To get it, and if you want to follow along later on, you will need to get it. You go to Simplifier, and I opened that one up here as well. You have to log in, but who has no account on Simplifier? It's simplify.net, and then you follow the buttons for Vonk, you end up here. You download an evaluation license, and you can download the binaries over here. That will get you a zip file that you can unzip and then run. And then what do you get? Well, I can show you what you get. Literally, it's a directory with a bunch of DLLs. Well, that doesn't help you very much, of course. And the actual server is in there as well. And you can run it with a simple command, .NET server.dll. And it will get us a running server. Now, what does it do? It hosts all these operations. But the interesting thing is how it does it. It has this concept of a pipeline that handles the requests that you send to it. So you send a search or a read or a validate or whatever, then the request comes in here at the beginning of this pipeline. And there are lots and lots of components in this pipeline that can handle that request. And one of them will, because it will be a match with the request you sent. So there's a component here to do a simple read, like patient 23. There's a component here that will handle search. There's a component here that will handle the validation. And then once one of the components has formulated the response, it will send that back. Now, what can you change with a plugin is to put a component in this pipeline at a place where you want it. Which means you can intercept the request, change it if you want, or just inspect it, or handle it. Besides that, you can also choose the backend. That's another topic. With Vonk comes a SQL Server backend, a MongoDB backend, and a SQLite backend. But if you have another proprietary repository, you can also write a facade. That's the topic of my talk on Friday morning, same time. A bit more detail. It's essentially the same image, but a bit more detailed, is what happens with the plugin. So this is the pipeline that runs in Vonk. And you see here, there's one that interprets your HTTP request, because there is this fire URL that has all this magic in it to recognize it as what kind of operation it is. That's what this does. And it has a prefer that can tell, where you can tell what you want back. Do you want a resource back or just a count or whatever? We run transactions, but then correctly spelled. And then there's the search to create and validate. There's a little sideway that runs our administration API. On our administration API, you can manage in Vonk the conformance resources. The conformance resources define what type of resources are known to Vonk, what search parameters are known to Vonk, what code systems and value sets are known to Vonk, and that can be used in validation. There's lots to talk about here, but that's not what we're going to do right now. Now, when you build a plugin, you can put your own thing here, or there, or right in front, or all the way at the back, depending on what you want to do. We'll get to do that, how you choose that. You can add your own settings to the ones that Vonk already has, so you can just have your settings from the app settings injected in your plugin, because probably you need some kind of setting that we don't ever use. But you can use the whole same framework. You can use the same logging. And as said, you can also put it right in front. So that's the concept of a plugin and what we're going to build right now. I have a very simple example. It's called Hello DevDays. And what it does is it intercepts a read operation on the person named hello, or with the ID hello, actually. So I could try that, because I have the server running now, and I don't believe there's any data in it right now, but we're going to just check that. It says a 404 not found. Right. And I have the plugin here. I did a small thing. I pre-configured plugin to be picked up by Vonk. I will tell you later how that works. Now I'm going to run this plugin from Vonk, from Visual Studio. It will actually. I better stop the other one, because they will be in conflict on the port. We don't want that. So I'm going to quickly show you what happens if we use this plugin. So this is the same Vonk server I just ran, but now it will have the plugin included. And it takes a little longer than it just did, because it's running in debug mode, and that always takes a little longer, but allows you to debug, so that's nice. And now when I ask for hello, it should give me a little response. Is it ready? It is, or it is almost. Yeah, there it is. Now this is a demo, and it works. Just to show you how easy it is to actually deploy a plugin into Vonk, because I had the same server. The only thing that happened is what Visual Studio did is here in that directory that I just showed you, there's a plugins directory, and it added the Hello DevDays. In this case, it's, well, there's the Hello DevDays DLL. And the one other thing I did before you were here is to say, on the root path, I want this plugin to be active. And there you go. So it's that easy to get a plugin into Vonk. Now, the slight slightly more involved part is building it. But we try to make that as easy as possible as well. Where's my actual presentation? There. No. Is it still somewhere? Oh, whatever. So that's where we're going. We have a vanilla Vonk. I showed you that. You can update, read, and validate on that. I didn't show you all that. Is everyone here a little familiar with the Fire RESTful API? Yeah, so I don't need to show that. And with the plugin, what changed? You got a response on the hello. This is not very useful, of course. There are lots more useful things you can do with plugins, and this whole session is actually to trigger your imagination to see what can I do with these plugins. But you can implement custom operations. We did that, for example, with the $document operation and a conversion between formats, XML and JSON. You can, and there are lots more. We just added a $transform to our public endpoint that can actually execute fire mappings. That's all built as a plugin. You can add specific types of logging. So if you want to know if some responses came back, you want to stream that into a time series database or something specific to your case. Related to that, you can do auditing. So you could say which requests have been done by whom, when, etc. Very interesting also for GDPR, for example, has this all been legitimate access. Authorization, especially if you go all the way in the front of the pipeline, you can add your own types of authorization. Maybe you have data in your database that allows you to match information from the token that you get into the data that is at hand. And that is probably a match that we don't know about, so you can do that yourself. By the way, Smart on Fire authorization is already included with Vonk. Or you can post-filter a response. The whole resource comes out, but you know that the client is not supposed to see all the fields in that resource. So you just strip out whatever they are not allowed to see. And you can also enrich responses. We had a customer that returns binary resources, but the actual content comes from their own internal systems. So they merge the content into the binary resource and then return it. And you can build them as well, and even sell them, because we introduced a marketplace for plugins. So you can add a license to your plugin and make sure it only gets run if the license is in place. If you want that, contact us. So now how to build this. I said this is a developer session, so we see lots of code, Visual Studio. But a plugin project is not very special. It's just a library project, a C# library project, or VB.NET if you prefer. I never encounter anyone who prefers that. But you could. But it's neat, and you need a couple of packages from Vonk, especially the Vonk core, which has all the core features of Vonk. And in this case, I chose to implement it for Fire R4. Vonk can support R3 and R4. You can implement it for R3, R4, or both. If you implement them on both, you need to take a little care to not break either one. And then you create an actual service that does the work. That's also nothing special. It's a class, it has no interfaces, it has nothing. But it has a method that takes the iVonk context as a parameter. You can see that in the code as well. So here is our solution. It has this Hello DevDays service. And there you have it. In this case, I added something else to a logger to be injected, but it's mainly about this method. This will do the actual work. So the iVonk context is what travels on that request and response. For those who are familiar with ASP.NET Core, they have a similar pipeline. That's why Vonk has this pipeline as well. And it has a HTTP context on it. And the Vonk context is similar, but it's expressed in FHIR terms. So it knows about the transaction the interaction that's being done. Is this a FHIR transaction? Is this a read? Is this a search? Is this a conditional create? It knows about the resource type that you did it on. Was this on patient, on person, or on the root? So for all resource types. It has, of course, the payload in the form of a resource. So if you do a post of a patient, it will have that patient in it. And then you can do something with it. What is iPhone context? That's what I just told. Maybe just for reference, I will also show you. That's why we're in Visual Studio. I can actually show you the interface. So it has a request that has all the requested details. I will go into that. It has a response. It has arguments that come from everywhere. So those are the ones on the URL, on the headers, on the form parameters. I think those are, and maybe internal ones, things that we add during processing. It has features for kind of a out-of-band transportation of things that you want to know further down. One important thing is the information model, which can currently be FHIR R3 or FHIR R4. And we imagine there might be more information models later on. The server base, where you got it from, and the description, that's mostly for debugging. I'll drill down a little more on the request that you get. It has a path that you got it on. It has a method. That's simply the HTTP method, get, post, put. Was this maybe a custom operation, and if so, which one was it? So validate for $validate. The interaction, well, that's the whole list of interactions you can do with the RESTful API. And as I said, it has the payload. Any questions on this? So a small group, I can take questions without losing the story. And here you see it again in an image. So here is how the HTTP context in normal HTTP.NET works. It has a whole bunch of middleware, and the HTTP context goes over it. And then we lay on top of that the iPhone context. So we interpret the HTTP context for you in terms that are easier. It's easier to process. So now we have a project. We defined a service class. And now we need to get it into that pipeline. We have a attribute for that, Vonk configuration. And if you put that on a static class, Vonk will pick it up and start reading that configuration. In normal ASP.NET, you can configure services for dependency injection, so services that are needed to be resolved. And you can define middleware in the pipeline, and we have two methods that resemble exactly that. So one that takes a service collection and returns it, and one that takes the application builder and returns that. You will, if you have only one of the methods, that will be picked up. If you have both, those will be picked up. Now the order, as you see here, that is important. As I stated before, you can put it anywhere in the pipeline, and this order determines where it will be. There it is. Yep. Maybe I'll also show it in code just to be. So here I put it in a separate class. It's the Hello DevDays configuration, and you see the full code as well. What happens with these services? The services configures the dependency injection. It's that simple. I'm not going to play dependency injection here. I can do that offline. But it says I need the Hello DevDays service to be available, and it can be a singleton because it will never change during the lifetime. Always do try add because the way this is configured, it might be called twice. And you don't want to inject it twice. Then the middleware configuration, I want it here. So I need an order to get it there. And that's how the pipeline works. So as soon as one of the components says, I know how to handle this, then the rest will not get a chance. So that's why it's so important where to put it. If I were to put my Hello DevDays service behind the normal read service, the read service would always catch it first. And I would never get a chance to react. And you said, well, if the interaction is a read, and it's on person, then handle this with my service. So what this does, it takes your service and wraps it into a piece of middleware in the ASP.NET Core pipeline. But then in a readable way.
Can the plugin look at the data and decide it for that particular request? It just wants to pass it down the line, or does it always have to be?
Yeah, you could catch, then you just catch Vonk interaction all, and then inspect it. But be prepared that every request will go through that method, so it better be fast. You're not going to do a lookup in the database for it.
No, but if it was an access control thing, for example,
yeah.
You might do that.
Yeah.
But presumably you could have something which says, if it's an instance read on a person and the person is thumbnail, look and inspect at that point, could you?
Yeah, you cannot inspect the ID here. But you would then do an instance read on person, and then in the service you check the ID. And then go on. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
Oh yeah, sorry. The question whether you could either decide in the service whether you want to act. You can just act on Vonk instance in Vonk interaction all, and you will get all the requests. And the other question was, can you also check it on the ID that was provided? That cannot be done in this Fluent interface. You would narrow it down to the read on person, and then in the service check the ID whether it's of interest to you. That's exactly what we do here. We check whether it's hello, and then we respond. And that's what I said, the handle with eventually takes your service and wraps it into middleware that is known to ASP.NET Core. So you generally don't have to do that yourself. Is that kind of clear? Now there's one more thing to do. Now we have a service and we have an implementation, and we said this is where you can find my configuration, but Vonk also has an app settings class that tells it how to operate, and that has a pipeline options, which defines what is going in the pipeline and what is not. And in this case, this was all already in the pipeline. It runs on SQLite, it runs subscriptions, it runs Smart, it runs R3 and R4. It runs all the core operations which are in here. It runs a demo UI. If you look at our demo site, you see that. And now I want to run this as well. So I take my namespace. This is a namespace prefix. And if it matches, then your configuration will actually be executed. Which means if this is the configuration file of the Vonk instance I was running, if I were to comment this out and then restart Vonk, it will not run my service. So that's a very easy way to switch functionality in and out. Also for the regular Vonk server, if you think I don't need this part, I don't need subscriptions, then just leave it out, and you're not bothered with it. We're programmers, so we want to debug. Now this is a little hard maybe, because the plugin runs in a separate process, which is the Vonk server. So we have to attach to that process. And this is how you do it. I'll show it in Visual Studio itself. If I ask for the properties of my project, I need to say, the easiest thing is to say the output path here, where the DLL is being built, I'm going to send that to my server plugins directory. And you can choose a subdirectory for your project, because it will recursively check all the subdirectories. That's one thing. So that means Vonk will actually pick up the plugin. And then the other thing is you don't start your project because it's a library, it can't run. But you say run the Vonk server, which is .NET Vonk server DLL, what I just did in PowerShell, and in this working directory, so in the Vonk server working directory. And then you get what you just saw when I did it. It's currently not running, so I can start it here, and let's put a breakpoint here. Oh, maybe here. Little starting. In the meantime, I don't need a test explorer. This is what you just asked, Dunmill. So if the context argument's resource ID says this is the ID hello, then I will act. So if the ID argument is equal to hello, then I will. Then it will proceed. Check it in the service. Yep. And there we are. So you have the whole context here. It's an instance read. It's on R4. It says it's an instance read on person hello. So the ID is indeed hello. And you can just step through our code. Well, I guess you know the rest. All right, back to the slide. How far am I in time? We started 5 past, so I have until 45. Right. Now the order becomes interesting because you can check that in the log file. I'll present you with the log file of this, and it's by default configured in the temp directory. So it's 20th, it should be this log file. You see a whole lot of times I ran it already. No, not now, please. And this is the latest run. So there you have it. You see all these numbers. I will go to the top. We already saw the pipeline options and the plugin directory. Well, this is the reflecting what it found in the plugin directory and in its own main directory. So it finds all these DLLs to pick up configuration from. So the first thing you check is, did it find my DLL? That's not mine, that's not mine, that's not mine. Oh, yeah, that's my DLL. Okay, it found my DLL. Because if you have a typo in your output path, it will not find it. Then the next thing is, how is that pipeline configured? And it will here tell you what it all picked up from your configuration and actually matched the pipeline option. So it's actually included and not excluded. Because the exclude in the pipeline options, it goes over the include. Well, there's a whole list of it with all these numbers. And as you can see, well, this is all just surfaces. And then here it starts to get interesting, HTTP to Vonk. So that's where the HTTP context is being interpreted into a Vonk context. After that, you can query the Vonk context. Right after that is the other way around. So when you're done with the response, it gets mapped back to the HTTP response. That's a bit of formatting. Well, other things. So you can see what it all does. And then the interesting part, of course, is here, the Hello DevDays configuration. It's I put it on 4408 because I know the read configuration is 4410. You can check that in the log and in the documentation. And I want to be before the read configuration. Some other interesting configuration here is pre-validation configuration, for instance. That has nothing to do with our plugin, but it allows you to validate any resource that's coming in. One other interesting thing about this is here, is the fire transaction configuration and the fire batch configuration. Who here has ever worked with fire transactions? Yeah. It's like putting a whole set of requests into a bundle, send it off to the fire server and say, do all of them or do nothing. And there's a whole bunch of processing because there is a defined order of processing them. They can refer to each other, etc., etc. So that's a whole lot of housekeeping to get going. But once you get it done, I think the unique thing about Vonk is it will run the rest of the pipeline for every entry in that transaction. So, this is currently running. And if I go to Postman, there, I could open up a transaction. You always post a transaction to the root, in this case the R4 root. And it has a bundle of type transaction, and it has two requests in it. One that asks for hello, and one that asks for person Fred. Well, we didn't inject Fred yet, so we'll do that up front. Update person Fred. That will still work. Our plugin has nothing to do with it. So there it is. And now we run our transaction. Send it. And we hit our breakpoint because of that entry that does a person hello. So, and then the next one, probably the first one was Fred, the next hello, or the other way around, I don't know. We'll see. This was apparently Fred. We don't handle Fred, so that will continue to the normal read surface, and that will just return Fred as we stored it. So we get a response, and probably I did something wrong because it says not implemented. Typical demo effect. The idea is it should still work. So the prefer header is not supported in this action. I will find it out later, but you saw you hit the breakpoint, so it actually does work. I just made a little mistake here, probably somewhere in the headers. So you just define your plugin, and it can be a part of transactions without you doing anything extra. If you change data in your plugin, you should be aware that you are in a transaction and be able to reverse it. That's the harder part. I'm not going to explain that in this session. Right. Nope, that's not the presentation. So that's about all the orders. Dependency injection. You can have things that are available to Vonk injected into your plugin. And in this case, I want a logger. You always want a logger to just log whatever is happening, and you can, by injecting this is standard ASP.NET, you can plug into the logging system that's already in Vonk, which uses Serilog, whoever knows that, and that can log to whatever, files, databases, console, etc. And it also takes all the logging settings, the default settings, and then over that the instance settings for this instance of Vonk. As promised, I will show everything in code as well, of course. And we kind of saw it already here. I just take that logger and can then use it here to log a trace. Yeah, client asks for hello. Other injectable services that are very important, there are more than these, but these are the most important. iSearch repository is used for searching data in the database, using the abstractions that we use, so you can use it across SQL Server, SQLite, MongoDB, or a facade. It will not be known to you. The counterpart is the change repository. It creates, updates, and deletes. Same abstraction. The model service will tell you which resource types are in scope and which search parameters you know of. You will often not need that because that is done upfront already. And sometimes you might need the serialization service, but in general that is being done for you by Vonk. You just return the resource and Vonk will see that it's serialized in whatever format was asked for. Now, make it a post handler. Let the read service handle it first, and then if it's not found, then we will respond with our resource. This is about handling things up front. Currently, we had this handler and it says, I know the answer if you ask for person hello. So I'll cut the pipeline short and the read service does not get a chance to answer at all. We call that a handler. You could also say, I want to do something in front and then send it along. That's a pre-handler. Like lock the request and then send it along, or enrich the request with something, or do authorization. And you only cut it short if the authorization fails. You can also do something on the way back. And now the interesting thing, if you do something on the way back, it should still be in front of the handler, as you can see in this image, but that is sometimes not intuitive to people. So now when we turn it into a post handler, we say, okay, I'll let the read handler do it first, and then if it doesn't have a response for person hello, then I will respond. And you can see that here in the post handler configuration. So that's just a different configuration. And I say, if it's a read on R4, this is the same, on person, and the status code is either it wasn't found or it was deleted. It's when you get a 410. Then call my service. Given time, I'm not going to demo that. Well, this is so it will only act on the way back. Yeah.
So in your example where you were looking on the ID, if it wasn't that ID, how does Vonk know to carry on with the pipeline in that case?
Sorry.
If the request comes in and you've tied it to /person,
Yeah.
and then within the plugin you look for the ID,
Yeah.
and it doesn't match, how does Vonk know to continue the pipeline rather than stop?
Oh, because in the yes, if it doesn't match this ID, how does it know to continue? Let's show the code for that. Indeed, it doesn't. That's why this is a bit of a vague example. Actually, you should make this a pre-handler in this case. Yeah, because this is not usually you would do something like this.
But if it's a pre-handler, won't Vonk always continue with the pipeline, even if you've created a response already?
Will Vonk always continue the pipeline if you have created a response already? If you change the status code to something that is like a success, or it will then cut the pipeline short. Yep. Oh, and that is also the reason why it will here continue, because it will never change the status code here. All right, final things, implementation of $documents. I will do that in 1 minute. The building of it was a little more work. But the essence is to see that it works the same way. We created a project, and it refers to the Vonk packages, in this case FireArt3, which also includes Vonk core. We have a couple of methods that handle a post of $document on the composition resource, because $document transforms a composition resource into a bundle that has all the resources referenced by that composition. And you can also do it on a get. So if you do composition ID document, you will get that. We make service classes and methods. So you see the methods and the document service class. It's very much like the Hello DevDays, but then a real work. Here we need other services. We need the search repository to find the resources being referenced. We need the change repository if we want to save the resulting bundle. We need, this is quite complex if you want to support multiple versions of Fire. We get out of the POCOs. This is advanced.NET API, and we need the logger. Another order, 4900, that's way down the pipeline because it's not being called very often. And then you see configure services and configure, that will configure the things in the pipeline and the services that we need. So this configures our document service that we just created, and it also adds a capability statement contributor. That's also interesting. Every plugin gets to add to the capability statement. So if you implement a custom resource, you say, I add this custom resource to the capability statement. So whenever your plugin is being picked up, it's directly becoming a part of the capability statement. And we register the document methods. And then it says, on a custom interaction, instance custom, so on a composition/ID, if document is being called, composition ID and document, and it's a get, then handle it async because the document service will access the database and use document instance get. And then we see it as we saw before with the run service here. In the documentation, there's reference documentation, but we're out of time, so you can read that yourself. For the next session, I prepared a little exercise to try this yourself. And you can, you don't have to start from scratch. You can use the example operation, which is on GitHub, as a template. So you can fork it or clone it into your own GitHub account and use it from there. But that will be the next session. I assume you will want to have a short break. I believe we continue at 55, isn't it? Yeah.